Testing, 1, 2. Okay. Thank you for your patience. I will go back to the beginning, and I apologize for this. This webinar has been approved for credits for planners, Florida attorneys, certified environmental health professionals, and certified floodplain managers. We'd also like to invite you to some upcoming webinars. Our next webinar is January 14th. And it's planning for sea level rise, legal issues facing Florida, and it's been approved for credits by the Florida Bar. It's also been approved for legal credits for planners, credits for certified floodplain managers, and certified environmental health professionals. So we encourage you to participate in those as well. That's available on our website at 1000friendsofflorida.org. We also encourage you to make a donation to 1000 Friends. We are a not-for-profit organization. We are trying to charge a minimal fee for these webinars, and we appreciate your donor support. We do know that there are a growing number of people who watch the webinars as groups, and if you in particular would consider making donations, we'd appreciate it. We are looking at ways to revamp our webinar program next year because we do need to offset the cost of paying for go-to training and the legal credits and the American Institute of Certified Planner credits. So if you have suggestions on how we can do that and still keep the cost reasonable, we would really appreciate that as well. If you're interested in downloading the PowerPoint is available at 1000friendsofflorida.org. Under What's New, it will be the current PowerPoint that's listed there. You also received a link to the PowerPoint in the email confirming the webinar. If you have sound issues still after we resolved ours, you do have a mixer on your computer somewhere that allows you to adjust the sound. You can also look on your control panel and do a sound check there to find out what issues might be going on. Questions. We're going to have 2 opportunities for questions. We have 2 speakers today, and we're going to do questions after each speaker. If you have questions, you can click on the chat box. It'll be a little plus sign. You can click on it to maximize it and type your message in here, and we will answer as many of the questions as possible. I'd like to, at this point, turn it over to Charles Pattison and let him start introducing the presenters. Charles?
Thanks, Vivian. This is Charles Pattison. I'm the Policy Director here at 1000 Friends of Florida, and pleased to welcome today Dale Allen and Doug Alderson. I'm going to introduce both of them, and then we'll begin with their presentations. Dale's the president of the Florida Greenways and Trails Foundation, and he's, of course, a long-term employee with Trust for Public Land that he joined in 1981. He was the Southeast Regional Manager for Trust for Public Land in 1986 and Vice President in 1988 and Senior Vice President in 1999. With his duties as Regional Director, he worked in a 9-state area that stretched from the Carolinas south to Florida and west to Louisiana. He's been a member of the Florida Trails Association for more than 20 years and was responsible for surveying and developing the Florida Trail from Swanee River to the Apalachicola River. Dale's a Florida native and a 1970 graduate of the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University. Doug Alderson is with the Florida Office of Greenways and Trails for the last 8 years. His principal duties include coordinating the state's designated paddling trails, including the 1,500-mile Florida Circumnavigational Saltwater Paddling Trail, and he also maintains the Visit Florida Greenways and Trails website. He is an author of several natural history and outdoor adventure books and is currently serving as the Office of Greenways and Trails Assistant Bureau Chief. So I'm going to turn it over to Dale Allen, and we'll get started.
Do I advance it here?
I think you're going to use it.
Well, good afternoon, Charles. Thank you very much, and thanks to 1000 Friends of Florida for enabling this webinar today. For those of you who have been with us for the last couple of years, this is the third of the presentations by the Florida Greenways and Trails Foundation on our effort to close the gaps between Florida's very unique system of local and state trails and to create a regionally connected trail network for the state of Florida. The first presentation, and I'm going to walk you into this slide by slide, but today's presentation is going to be more about the remaining trails in the top 10 regional trail systems. First, a word about the mission of the Florida Greenways and Trails Foundation. We're an advocate for the statewide system of trails and greenways, and this is all types of trails. On your screen, you'll see the land bridge over I-75 that's available for equestrians, bikers, as well as hikers. And on your right side of your screen, you'll see the paved bicycle trail out to the Withlacoochee Bay that goes from the Felburn Trailhead. So we're an advocate for all types of trail users and trail systems in the state of Florida. We couldn't do this without the many partners and supporters in this effort, and I particularly want to thank Genesis, a transportation and park planning organization that has worked with us since the beginning of this endeavor. If you work or are employed by a planning and transportation firm and have an interest in participating with the Greenways and Trails Foundation, please feel free to call us. We've gotten a number of inquiries from around the state, and we've got a lot of local projects that we could certainly use some help on. But thanks to Genesis and the agencies of government, the Department of Transportation, Division of Recreation and Parks, Office of Greenways and Trails, our many partner not-for-profit organizations, and then the many foundations who are supporting our work statewide. All of the materials you're going to see today are derived from the statewide Greenways and Trails System Plan. We are in the midst of this 5-year plan, and the trails that we're going to be featuring are all part of their priority trail system. So if you've not seen this document, strongly recommend you get it and take a look at it. It's an excellent publication and will be guiding the development of the whole statewide system. Of particular importance is Chapter 260 of the Florida statutes that defines the statewide system and establishes the powers of the department. It also creates the Trails Council and the Trails Acquisition Program, which has been the funding source for many of the pieces of the trails that currently exist. And under the Florida Forever program, 1.5% of those bonded monies were dedicated to greenways and trails. This map comes from the plan that I just mentioned, and this includes all the state's trail system. The blue is the state's paddling trail system, including the circumnavigation paddling trail. The orange is the Florida National Scenic Trail, and all the others are the multi-use trail system in the state of Florida. I'm going to strip away all of the blue and the orange so that you can see the underlying priority trail system, the map that was adopted in 2012. If you look closely at this map, you can see the light green segments are the existing pieces of trail. The dark green are the proposed connectors. And what I'm going to be showing you is a more detailed look at this whole system in a little bit easier fashion. So let's get into that. First of all, it's important for everyone to understand the role of the Department of Transportation in this effort. The Department of Transportation has been an integral partner in this effort. Most of the paved trails in the state of Florida have been paved with state trust fund money that's come from the federal government. But in the last legislative session, the Department of Transportation was given new legislative authority to use revenues of the State Transportation Trust Fund for the establishment of the statewide system of interconnected multi-use trails. This was the first time ever that the state now can use state trust fund monies in addition to federal trust fund monies to build our emerging statewide system. This is a very big step forward, and I want to thank the legislature for giving the department that authority. And as you can see, Section 335.065 of the Florida statutes lets this department use these appropriated monies to pay for the cost of planning, acquisition, design, and construction of trails and related facilities. These are some of the examples of projects that the Department of Transportation has been involved in. The I-75 land bridge, the bridges along the Overseas Highway, the so-called Overseas Heritage Trail in the Keys, the St. Mark's to Tallahassee State Trail, one of the first trails ever in the state of Florida. And as you can see from the bottom right of your screen, the new Courtney Campbell Shared Use Trail on the north end of Tampa Bay. That is the first ever fully pedestrian bicycle devoted bridge in the state of Florida. The bridges are done. The whole trail across the north end of Tampa Bay is under construction. It's not done yet, but it's already becoming one of the Tampa Bay area's largest recreational amenities. So if you haven't been out there, go out and take a look at it. It's quite spectacular. We also want to thank the voters of Florida for their support of Amendment 1. We now have Florida, thanks to this, Florida now has a dedicated funding source not only to protect and restore our waters and to greatly improve the management of our public lands. We also have funds to complete the statewide Greenways and Trail system as required by Chapter 260. So you'll be seeing and hearing more about the efforts of the foundation to recommend that a minimum of 10% of these monies be used to acquire and develop this system, as well as to build local trails connecting our state parks and conservation lands along this regional trail system. This will be an amazing amenity for the people of Florida if it can actually be put in place, and we have a funding source that will allow that to happen. The red lines have shifted on this presentation, but I mostly wanted you just to see Amendment 1. We highlighted the portions of the amendment that speak directly to the enhancement of public access and recreational enjoyment of conservation lands and recreational trails. So they're in the amendment for sure. All right, we're at the threshold of these regional trails. I want to show you what's going on briefly. Of the 200 miles of the proposed 250-mile coast-to-coast connector are in place. And thanks to the action of the legislature last year, there is work ongoing right now on the 50 miles of the gaps on the entire connector. There's almost 600 miles of the 2,000-mile connected statewide system that has been envisioned in the Greenways and Trails plan. The economic impact of these trails are going to be enormous. All you've got to do is go look at communities like Winter Garden and Dunedin on the Pinellas Trail to see what impact these have had. And over the last 20-plus years, the state of Florida has purchased over $1 billion worth of conservation land all over Florida. If we can just figure out a way to connect 1/3 of these lands to our priority trail system, the public health benefits and tourist economic benefits will be very dramatic. Now, for some people who may not know what these trails look like, I'm going to share with you a couple of examples. These are some of the connected trails that currently exist. This is the Great Allegheny Passage, a 400-mile trail system that currently connects downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with Washington, D.C. This trail system is now receiving well over 500,000 users every summer, and you can see some of the structures and some of the landscapes that this trail connects on the Great Allegheny Passage. This is one of the newest long-distance trails. This is the Confederation Trail in Canada. This is a 275-mile connected system. It connects the one end of Prince Edward Island to the other. This has only been open for 4 years now, totally connected, and it's already created a whole another month of tourism activity on Prince Edward Island. September has become Bike Month, and people from all over the world are traveling to Prince Edward Island to ride from one end of this beautiful island to the other and enjoy fall at this northern latitude. So the Confederation Trail, check it out. It's a real beautiful thing. Also the Katy Trail, the former Kansas, Arkansas, and Texas Railroad. This 250-mile connected trail system between St. Louis and Kansas City is also open and available for public use. This trail is paved in the urban areas and has a hardened surface, crushed stone surface in the rural areas, and they've repurposed many of the old railroad bridges for this trail, as you can see. Our nearest long-distance trail competitor is the Silver Comet in the metropolitan area of Atlanta. It connects Smyrna, Georgia to Anniston, Alabama, and as you can see, the Silver Comet is a 12-foot wide concrete trail the entire length of the corridor. One of the most beautiful trails in the United States right now is the Coeur d'Alene Trail, a 75-mile trail on the former Union Pacific Railroad bed that connects Mullen, Idaho to Plummer, Idaho. It is over 350,000 visitors to northern Idaho this last summer, and not all the visitors are human. You can see from the moose in the bottom right-hand corner, these trails are also great greenway corridors for wildlife. It doesn't take much but even a moose can follow these corridors safely, and they're beginning to repopulate parts of Idaho where moose have been seen now for well over 80 years. These trails are not just rural trails. The High Line in New York City is a repurposed elevated railroad trestle on the lower southwest side. As you can see from these photos, this is an extraordinary facility for the people of New York, and it's now become the second most visited tourist attraction after the Statue of Liberty for Manhattan. It has become an elevated garden and walkway for over 30 blocks in Manhattan. And probably one of the most spectacular bridges I've been able to experience is the one they call the Walk Over the Hudson. This is a little over a mile bridge on a former two-span railroad corridor that has been reconstructed by the New York Department of Transportation, and it hosts thousands of visitors now and has made Poughkeepsie, New York, a major tourist destination for New York State. Who would have ever thought? Close to home, this is the proposed coast-to-coast connector. I'm going to show you first what it currently looks like. These are the pieces of the trail that currently exist. You can go out and ride. This is the proposed connector, and all portions, all the gaps on this connector now are being worked on, and the current projected timeline on this project is that this trail should be completed by 2020 and available to the public. From all the way from the Atlantic Ocean to downtown St. Petersburg on Tampa Bay. This will be Florida's longest continuous trail at 250 miles and will bring us into the big leagues of regional trail systems. Once we close, that's what it's going to look like. And, of course, those are the gaps that we're working on right now. They're in different stages of development, from actual construction in segments to feasibility planning and others. On the last webinar, you heard about this connected system. These are the next two regional connectors that we're advocating for the state of Florida. The Northeast Coast Connector, which will link Fernandina Beach to the coast-to-coast. Let me show you what the trail segments currently look like. Those are all the pieces that are currently paved and open to the public. This is the proposed corridor for the Northeast Coast Connector, with the red being the gaps and the blue being pieces that are currently funded or under construction right now. So once that's completed, you'll be able to bicycle off-road safely from Fernandina Beach all the way down to Deland and Deltona, where these are the gaps that need to be closed to make that system work, and that's where it meets the coast-to-coast connector. The other big regional connector system that we're advocating for is what we're calling the Southwest Coast Connector. This would link the Tampa Bay area to Naples. These are the pieces that currently exist in that system. This is the proposed alignment for that regional trail, connecting all the way from St. Petersburg to Naples. Again, the red being areas of true gaps where there's not any land available. The blue and purple being areas where there's funding right now to close some of these gaps. That's what the proposed alignment would look like, where it meets the coast-to-coast in downtown St. Petersburg, and these are the gaps that need to be closed to make this system work. I'd like to share with you the state map for the seven transportation districts, and what these three connected trails would look like statewide once they're connected together. And it would give us a 750-mile trail system stretching from Fernandina Beach through Central Florida all the way down to Naples. But as I alluded to in the last webinar last December, that's not the end of the proposed statewide priority trail system network. These are what's available, and I'm going to show you much more detail on today's presentation. We're calling these the top 10 trails for the state of Florida, and they're in various stages of development all over Florida right now. Let me take you into these now. I'm going to do this from north to south. This is what we are calling the Great Northwest Coastal Trail. This will link Pensacola to Panama City. This is the current pieces of trail that exist right now. As you can see, there's none in Okaloosa County, but there's a very good system that's under development in Walton County, as well as pieces in Bay County. These are the pieces that need to be acquired to make that system connect, and these are the pieces that actually have funding in place right now and are under development. This is what that connected system would look like. It would connect many of our state parks along the Gulf of Mexico to this regional system. Coming further east and a little bit south is the second part of the Great Northwest Coastal Trail. This will link Panama City to St. Mark's. These are the pieces that currently exist. As you can see, there's a lot of work to do on this section, but there's several railroad corridors out there that once they're acquired will help us link this together. This is what the system is currently envisioned to look like. These are the true gaps for which no land currently exists. These are the pieces that are actually under development or being contemplated as part of the system right now. And as you can see, it would link Panama City and the beach to the St. Mark's and to the St. Mark's, the existing Tallahassee to St. Mark's Historic State Trail. That's what the connected corridor, priority corridor, would look like. This is coming further to the east across the rest of the northern part of Florida. It's this proposed, we're calling the Old Florida and the Nature Coast Connector. These are the pieces that currently exist between Palatka and Tallahassee St. Mark's. As you can see, most of them are either in Putnam County or in Alachua County, but there's a good section connecting Cross City to Trenton and Newberry. These are the pieces that we need to acquire, and the system that's the most ready to connect of that priority network is this one that we're going to show you right now, that would link St. Mark's to the Nature Coast Trail system through the Gainesville-Alachua system all the way to Palatka, the Old Florida Nature Coast Connector. And the next system coming further south is this one. That's the St. Johns River to Sea Loop. This is what that system currently looks like, linking the Deltona area to St. Augustine and the Atlantic seaboard. This is the proposed gaps that are in the statewide system that need to be acquired. These are the pieces that actually have funding in place and are being worked on right now. And when fully developed, this would be what the St. Johns River to Sea Loop would look like. You can see how it would connect at Palatka in the center upper portion of the screen to the proposed Old Florida Nature Coast Connector, and that would allow a connected trail system all the way from St. Augustine all the way across to Pensacola. The next system coming south is the Heart of Florida Loop. I'm going to show you, this is the area around north of Orlando. This is the trails that currently exist as part of this system. You may recognize that many of the southern pieces of this system are part of the coast-to-coast connector. These are the parts that need to be acquired and are actually under active consideration now by many of the local governments in this area. These are the pieces that are being worked on, the blues and the purples, and this is the Heart of Florida Loop. The southern third of that whole loop is the coast-to-coast connector. The whole western side is currently in place, which is the Withlacoochee State Trail, and we just learned recently that Marion County MPO or TPO has approved $5 million to pave a trail through the Cross Florida Greenway, which would complete it all the way from Denellen to the Silver River State Park. So this whole loop is very close to actually taking off, and in the next couple of years, I think we're going to see movement on many portions of this loop. One of the most important segments of the entire statewide system is going to be the final southern terminus or the tropical terminus for the East Coast Greenway. This East Coast Greenway is a proposed off-road trail system that would link all the way from Maine to Key West. This is the southernmost portion of that system. These are the pieces that would link Titusville all the way to Miami. You can see there are some important pieces already in place in Palm Beach and Broward counties, as well as some portions of Brevard and Indian River. These are the gaps that we need to focus on and connect, and these are the pieces for which funding exists, and we're hoping to complete. So the East Coast Greenway Tropical Terminus would take us all the way from Titusville to Miami. That's the corridor that's envisioned. I should also point out that there is an alternate corridor that's being looked at by the Florida Rails to Trails Conservancy that would parallel the proposed all-aboard Florida alignment high-speed rail corridor. Those negotiations are underway right now, and we did not put them on this map, but it would be highly complementary to this tropical terminus segment of the East Coast Greenway if it were developed as well. One of the most interesting regional corridors that's being proposed for Florida is the River of Grass Greenway that would parallel US 41. The currently under development, as you can see, is the piece in Dade County and a portion in western Collier County outside of Naples. But this is the alignment that is being proposed, and it would connect the Southwest Corridor Coast Connector all the way across to the tropical terminus of the East Coast Greenway. A very ambitious undertaking that is being looked at quite seriously now, and we're very supportive of this project and hope it can be brought to fruition. The last piece is already one of the most popular pieces in the statewide system. It's the Overseas Heritage Trail. The incredible news is that this system is largely complete. One of the most challenging and difficult stretches of trail in the state of Florida over a decade now has been under development. Many of these trails are already paved. The bridges have been paved. And what we're looking at now is the last significant gaps in the system, which will link it all the way together and bring it up to the tropical terminus in Miami. So that's the proposed Overseas Heritage Trail, already receiving well over 1 million visitors a year, and another tremendous asset the state of Florida can offer to the world as part of this regionally connected trail system. That's the corridor. So where do we go from here? Future trail funding opportunities. We know that strong support exists in the Florida legislature for these regionally connected trails. The transportation benefits of these are quite obvious now to most people. The health benefits of this, as well as the tourism and economic benefits, are also becoming widely recognized. We now have statutory authority under Chapter 335. The Department of Transportation shall give funding priority projects that are identified in the Florida Greenways and Trails Council as a priority within the state system. This is why Doug Alderson will be speaking after me to make sure you know how to get your local trails included in the priority trail system. And these trails have to support the transportation needs of bicyclists and pedestrians. It needs to have national, statewide, and regional importance. And these funds can be used to facilitate an interconnected system of trails by completing the gaps between existing trails. The next steps are for the foundation and for the folks on this conference call, this webinar, we need to continue to build public awareness of local existing trails on the state priority trails maps. We've got to focus with our MPOs on closing these local gaps to begin creating these regionally connected trails you've seen. These regional trails must be on OGT's priority trails and top-tier list if they're going to be able to tap into State Highway Trust Fund monies. And to make sure that happens, regional alliances of MPOs and TPLs must make these regional connectors a priority and request funding assistance for these regional corridor studies that are going to make the alignments work. Last, we're going to be talking to state elected officials about appropriating 10% of Amendment 1 monies to close the gaps and build this regionally connected system. That concludes my presentation today. I hope you found that to be interesting. If you have interest or questions about any of these regionally connected trails, they will be posted on our website after the first of the year. You can also go to the Office of Greenways and Trails, priority trail maps, and we're available to take any questions.
Okay, Dale, could you forward it to the next slide? There we go. We are taking questions now, so if anybody has them, you can use the chat box on your control panel, and there's a little plus sign next to the chat. If you click on it, it'll maximize it, and you can write your question and send it in. We do have some questions in, so I will get started with them. I'm going to try to start with big picture questions and then get down to more specific ones. There's one question about assumption that these trails will also serve as wildlife corridors. Is that correct, Dale?
Yes, it depends a lot on the width of the corridor, but there's quite a bit of evidence that shows that wildlife will use any protected corridor. The one I showed was, of course, in Idaho along the Coeur d'Alene Trail. But there's quite a bit of evidence that shows that all types of wildlife will traverse any safe way to get across traffic.
Okay, and we have a question about what percent of the population will use these trails, and I imagine it varies widely from one area of the state to the other, but do you have any information on anticipated usage, at least in some of the areas of the state?
We know that the already completed segments in the urban areas are getting phenomenal levels of use. Pinellas County is recording well over 100,000 users a month on the Pinellas system, so there's over 1 million people a year using their system. Those numbers are fairly comparable to what's occurring on the West Orange Trail and the Seminole-Wekiva. Our assumption is that there will be at least those many users on the coast-to-coast connector once it's built together, as well as hundreds of thousands of international tourists. If the experiences of other states that have created these long-distance trails are any reflection, Florida, with its year-round climate, will be a mecca for trail users from all over the world.
And what about economic impacts? Is there any analysis either in Florida or elsewhere about the economic benefits of these trails to the local and state economy?
Oh, yeah. There's a great deal of information on that. I think probably the best website is the Rails to Trails Conservancy. If you go to their site and look at economic benefits, there are literally hundreds of studies now that document the economic value of these trails for purely economic reasons. In Florida, the evidence is mostly local right now. Cities like Dunedin in Pinellas County and Winter Garden are the classic examples of downtowns that have been almost totally transformed thanks to not only the creation of these trails, but also in reinvestment by the local governments to maximize the aesthetic qualities of these trails, as well as to make it easier for businesses to relocate along or adjacent to these trails. I think the economic impact of these trails are going to be fairly monumental all over the state of Florida, primarily to the mid-size and rural areas. Once they're connected to this trail, I think they're going to get an extraordinary benefit in any place where they're connected.
Okay, related to that, how are the trail gap projects going to be prioritized for state funding? Do you have a way of prioritizing the projects right now, or is it as land becomes available, or is an option?
There are two pieces to that, two answers to that question. One, of course, is the actual acquiring the Greenway corridor, the land corridors itself, and that will be done through the state's Greenways and Trails program. It's a competitive program, and I'm sure they'll be receiving money, Amendment 1 monies, to help continue that program. So once the corridors are actually acquired, then the action shifts to the Departments of Transportation and the MPOs. On the MPOs, collectively, they're making the priority decisions on what sections get what kinds of money and their readiness to be developed. So two different groups that have to be worked with, but the combined weight of all of that is we're getting these trails done.
Okay. Another financial question. Has there been an analysis of how much money is needed from the state over what period of time to complete the system? The person is saying if you get 10% from Amendment 1, that's about 19 billion over 20 years. Is that enough?
It's hard to be totally accurate on this one. The only thing we've got to date is an estimate that was prepared by the Office of Greenways and Trails last year that indicated that they feel that a ballpark estimate for this would be about $1.5 billion to complete the entire statewide trail network. A lot of that, of course, depends upon the cost of acquiring the corridors. That's a big piece of it, and the kind of infrastructure that's going to be needed to make the system connect. Bridges are often one of the most expensive construction projects on these corridors. So I think for right now, the $1.5 billion is a good ballpark estimate moving forward.
Okay. Has there been any analysis of the natural services, ecological services of the trails anywhere in the country, I guess, not just Florida?
Not sure I understand what that question means. Nature services?
There's ecosystem services, I guess is what they're saying. The value of protecting land and filtering water and reducing car use and things like that. So the benefits to the ecosystem of doing that type of work.
Yeah, well, that's kind of a hard one to quantify. I think the major advantage that's going to occur from a lot of these corridors initially is their conversion from high levels of industrial use as railroad corridors into much more of a recreational corridors. As part of this, there's a lot of improvements that are being made to these corridors that were not done when the railroads were constructed back in the 19th and early part of the 20th century. So in many areas, former drainage ways are being reconnected when these trails are built. A lot more water retention features are being built, and they're beginning to serve as part of regional realignments of their stormwater systems. So that's probably the first and major benefit that we're going to see. I think the major benefit we're going to see, though, is giving Florida citizens an opportunity to become more familiar with these landscapes. You can't appreciate many of Florida's landscapes from a moving vehicle, but when you're on a bicycle or on foot and walking through them, you really have a chance to see much more wildlife and experience Florida in a more natural way. I think that's going to increase the public's interest and support for more conservation all over the state of Florida, because they'll have a chance to see these places firsthand.
Okay. We have a question about who the bike trails are geared for. Are they for families, bike group riders, mountain hybrid bike crowd? Is there a particular audience, or does it vary by area of the state?
It varies somewhat by area, but the answer is really basically all of these. These are multi-use trails. In many areas, there are equestrian trails that parallel the paved trails. In other areas, the trails aren't even paved. They're just hard surfaced. And they range the gamut where we're seeing bicyclists use the paved trails to get to mountain bike trails. A classic example exists here in North Florida, where many people access the Munson Slough mountain bike trail system by using the St. Mark's a rail trail to get to it. So I think you're going to see a great deal of that all over the place. But clearly, the paved trails are open for everybody to use. They're extremely handicapped accessible. They're family friendly, and we've seen everybody from children to the elderly out there and recreating on them. So they're universally accessible to all members of all population segments.
Okay, and are the trails paved, separated paths at least 10 feet wide?
That's, I think, the minimum that's now allowed. The recommended standard is 12 feet in the rural areas, and in the urban areas where there's so much pedestrian and bicycle traffic, we either go to 15 feet or separated paths. I think Pinellas County has a 12-foot bike path and a 8 or 10-foot pedestrian way that parallel each other, just to avoid user conflicts, because the demands on the trail are so extreme right now.
Okay. We have time for maybe 2 more questions, so people hold your questions and we'll answer more at the end. But are there any tax incentives for private property owners who may be asked to provide an easement for the trail?
There almost certainly are, but it would depend on the tax needs of the individual landowner. I think the primary benefit to adjacent landowners is getting access to this regional system. One of the most sought-after amenities in most new developments these days are greenways and trail connectors in their communities. And if a development comes in adjacent to one of these regional trail connectors, then they have access not only to the regional trail but ultimately to the entire statewide trail system once these things are all connected together. So the developer and the people in those communities are going to get a great deal of benefit. I think one of the most difficult land use changes that take place along these corridors are when big commercial developments come in adjacent to them, simply because of the amount of roadway cuts that often occur. But these trails, especially the regional connected trails, are extremely residential development friendly.
Okay. And final question, do you have any advice for people who are not within transportation planning organizations, how they can secure funding for trail segments in their areas? I'm assuming this is more rural parts of the state.
Yes, Vivian, that would be right. Yeah, the number one way to do this is to talk to your county commissioners and your local government elected officials. We're going to be, the Florida Greenways and Trails Foundation this next year is going to be hosting a series of symposiums all over Florida to try to bring the existing MPOs and local governments together, especially in the more rural parts of the state, to have that conversation about what it's going to take to connect. That's going to be especially true when we start working on the Florida Nature Coast and the Great Northwest Coastal Trail. Many of the counties up there are not part of larger MPOs, and certainly there aren't the alliances that exist in Central Florida. So look, your local government officials are your go-to groups. It never hurts to talk to your Chamber of Commerce and your tourist development councils. Make them aware of it. Every chamber that I've ever spoken with, or Tourist Development Council, have been enormously supportive of these paved trails. They just benefit both the residents of Florida and our tourism industry in so many ways. There's a broad audience for these trails right now all across the state of Florida.
Okay, thank you, Dale. We've gotten several compliments on your work and leadership, so I wanted to pass that on to you. Let's turn it over to Doug now. And again, for those of you who want to ask questions, we will have another opportunity at the end of the webinar. So, Doug, why don't you go ahead and proceed?
Yes, thank you. Great to be here. As Dale alluded to, we make the opportunity maps and we make priority maps for the trail system. It's not just the multi-use trails we key on paddling, hiking, equestrian trails as well. But we'll be updating our maps in 2015. We'll be reaching out to the different local governments and stakeholders and planners around March 1st, early March. So we will be contacting many of you on this webinar soon about that. And what does that entail? Basically, every year these trails are gaining momentum, and so there's more trails. There are more trails planned every year. So we're going to be adding to our maps. In many cases, on our process 3 years ago, we didn't have a specific alignment for a proposed trail, and in many cases now we do. So we'll be making those lines more specific. We have general maps that cover the whole state and regions, but then our planners have maps that go down to each block of a city, for example, so they get very specific as to the alignment. We not only do the land trail opportunity maps, but we're going to do paddling trail opportunity maps. What this means is that every trail that's proposed or existing goes on these maps. So they can be a trail that's just conceptual right now, we may put them on the maps. But to become a priority map, priority trail, they need to be connected to this system in some way and have momentum from the local governments. And so that's the process we'll be doing the next few months. So we derive these priority trails from the opportunity maps we have. And as Dale pointed out so well, many of these will form longer trail corridors throughout the state. Stay tuned in September. We'll be having at least 6 public workshops throughout the state to get direct feedback from the public at these workshops. We'll have all the different maps, the regions, and people can write their thoughts down on the maps and as well as written comments. All of this is on our website, by the way, and I'll give you the website at the end of my presentation. So we build on previous state investments, and as Dale alluded to, there's so many different things these trails promote besides economic benefits, psychological well-being, physical health, all the different things these trails promote. One thing we'll be doing, the next step after we establish the priority trail system update, we'll be updating our trails gap map. And this gets very specific as well. You'll see the state map, then we'll zoom in to different regional and local areas as well to see the gaps in the entire system. And many times we'll have different colors, and these relate to the stage of development for the trail. So we'll get very specific at if the trail's in the design stage, if it's being built, if it needs to be acquired for the right-of-way. So we'll know all that information by the end of this process. It'll be very current at the end of the year. Currently, we receive 1.5% of Florida Forever money, and we're very proud of the fact that we have purchased over 9,000 acres in the last several years. And I'll specifically show you one trail that we purchased a few years ago. And these are some of the corridors that Dale looked at, and these all come from our priority trails map. And so will there be more corridors in the future? Could be. As these trails are developed, there may be obvious that we have other long-distance corridors that will emerge from them. So it's pretty exciting. It's a pretty exciting point to be in Florida right now as far as a trail planner. So this happens. These trails come about. It's not really a top-down process. It really comes from the bottom up. It comes from talking to the local governments, the trail users, decision makers. They see the demand, they see the use, and so they're trying to meet that demand. And so it's really not just from us. We take it from the ground up. And this is a photo from one of our public workshops we had a couple years ago. And here's an example. Each trail is a little bit different as to how it may come about. In this case, our office did acquire the East Central Regional Rail Trail with Florida Forever money. So it was a pretty long corridor, over 30 miles long. And then it was prioritized with the Space Coast TPO and the Volusia TPO. And it's signed its construction from DOT, and it's developed and managed by Volusia County, Brevard County, and the city of Titusville. So as you can see, many partners are involved. In some cases, the trail is managed by the state. We have 10 state trails, but more often than not, they are managed by different local governments. And so oftentimes these trails then are subleased to local governments, and they are managed by the local governments. And that's going to be the general trend. I don't think the state's going to take on too many more big state projects that the state will manage unless it's the legislature requests that and provides the funding for that. So you can see in the Coast to Coast Trail how many local trails tie together, and here's a list of most of them, not all. I think there's 16 here. There's a couple smaller trails that are not on this map, but you can see this is an incredible effort of tying in all of these local trails together. And this trail will be managed by different local governments, and we will assist with the overall state vision. We had an incredible summit in October, sponsored by the foundation, our office, and DOT. We had over 150 people show up, and that was the first time all of these different entities came together in one room to focus on this trail. So we'll be having a type of steering committee meeting in January to begin looking at how to tie this trail together with signage, to the different amenities that's going to be needed, the guidebooks eventually. So we're going to be thinking of the user perspective, and so people will know they're on this coast to coast as well as the local trail that's part of the system. It's fun to have these ribbon cuttings. Every trail segment that's open, every new bridge, I think it's a great way to celebrate the trail and bring out people. Some of you may have been at the May 16th Denellen Bridge dedication, just a fun event, and you just get a feel for how many people are supportive of this process. And this closed the gap between two trail systems. And so now, as Dale mentioned, Marion County is really committed to extending their trail system because it's connected to the bigger picture right now. But let's not forget we also are partners with the Forest Service and the Florida Trail Association on completing the Florida National Scenic Trail. The trail is doable now, but there's almost 300 miles that are not certified, and many of those miles are on roads. And so a whole coalition of folks are trying to determine the best way to close those gaps. And Dale is working very hard with the foundation. They received a challenge cost share agreement, I believe, to look at some of the major gaps, the 3 major gaps on the Florida National Scenic Trail. So right now, over 1,000 miles, this trail are certified, and the goal is to complete the rest of it, the other 300 miles. So you'll be hearing more about closing some of the major gaps within the next couple of years. And one big focus of our office, too, are the paddling trails. And this brings a lot of folks, residents, tourists alike, love to do the paddling, whether it's a beautiful wild river or the coast of Florida. And this map is a little bit outdated because we have just added 2 more. We added a whole system in Lake County last Thursday at the Florida Greenways and Trails Council meeting, and we added a segment of the Upper Chipola River at the same meeting. So we have now 52 designated state trails. When I say designated, the council designates trails, and at the same meeting we designated the Watersound Trail. It's on St. Joe property near Panama City. So they open up their trail to the public. So what does that gain them? Well, one of the questions alluded to this. It gains them liability protection. So if a private landowner wants to open up a trail to the general public, they get liability protection when it's state designated, as long as they don't charge money for entrance. So that's a big plus, and so that really has helped us develop this system across some private land. Economic impact, Dale mentioned, just so you know, we're part of the Florida State Park system now, and all of the state trails are managed by the state park system. The number 1 unit in the state park system is the Florida Keys Overseas Heritage Trail as far as economic impact, over $91 million a year in impact. That's followed by Honeymoon Island, but close to that is the Cross Florida Greenway, which is it's a trail system really on the Greenway, equestrian, hiking, as well as biking. So an incredible revenue source, and that just shows you among the 171 state park units, the number 1 unit is a trail, a multi-use trail. So here's the website, and if you look on the website, we have the trail library. We have some of the many studies about the economic benefits of trails. There's a few local studies as well as national studies of some of these trails. That will really be a good resource as well. We also have an online trail guide. So we're trying to capture every trail in Florida that's accessible to the public. So we have over 400 trails that you can find on this website. And we have the paddling trails and other resources as well. So I encourage you to check out the website. We'll also be posting the different schedules for the map updates on the website. So please keep that on your browser and check back with us in 2015 for those updates. So at this point, I want to have plenty of time for the questions, and Dale can feel free to chime in too. We can kind of open up to both of us, I believe. And
Okay, thank you very much, Doug. And I've got a few housekeeping things, and then we'll go back to the questions. So if you do have questions, please use the chat box and submit them, and we'll answer as many as possible. I did want to remind you again, this event has been approved for credits for planners, Florida attorneys, and others, and here's the information on it. It's also posted on our website. The PowerPoint is loaded at 1000friendsoflorida.org under What's New, and it has the name of today's webinar on it, Planning for Greenways. And again, sound issues, hopefully you don't have any anymore, but you can adjust the volume on your computer, or here is the sound check box. And again, questions, this is the chat box right here if you do have questions that you'd like to submit. We also have some upcoming webinars that are planned. The January 14th one, Planning for Sea Level Rise, Legal Issues Facing Florida, has been approved for credits for Florida attorneys and planners and floodplain managers. And it is available on our website at 1000friendsoflorida.org, so you can register now for it. And again, we encourage you to consider making a donation to support 1000 Friends. Our webinars, obviously the $10 and the sponsors does not cover the full cost of these, so we appreciate any donations you can provide to help support it. Whoops, I went too far. At this point, let me go back to the questions. I'm going to try to pick up where we stopped, and if time permits, I'll go back and try to recapture some earlier questions that might have been asked. There is another question on the whole issue of tax incentives for private property owners. They wondered if there is any website or information that has information on tax incentives for landowners if the easement has conservation or historic significance value. And do either of you have anything like that posted on your sites, or is that something you could do?
We just post the information on the designation that gives them the liability protection. So on our website, you'll see a designations section.
Okay.
I don't believe we have the other links to that. We also have a grants link that links to the different grants that are available to planners and local governments.
And from the Foundation's perspective, we do not either have anything on our website on that particular issue. So often the question of the valuing these easements or these rights is particular to the property and to the landowner's financial circumstances. The best, if they're considering such a thing, the very best thing they can do is to work with a financial planner or their CPA and look at it in detail that way. Generically, it's hard to really give people much guidance when they don't have the specifics.
Okay. So the advice is to talk to your CPA or your attorney about your personal piece of property to find out what might value. Yeah.
The safest and the most accurate way to get good information.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from another person who has concerns about maintaining natural light and dark skies, particularly on some of the interior conservation lands. Is that something that is taken into consideration when planning or designing these trails?
Oh, absolutely. Most of these trails, except in the urban areas, are closed at sunset, just like the parks are. So there shouldn't really be any nighttime use in these areas, and I'm not aware of any sections of these trails that are actually illuminated at night. In the more urban areas where people are using these trails for transportation and commuter purposes, there are lights in certain areas, but I think many communities are becoming more aware of this issue, and their lights are largely downly focused light and not broad illumination lamps. So I'm not aware that this has ever been a problem in any area. In none of the regional trails that I've been on across the nation has this ever come up as an issue of concern.
Okay. We have kind of a procedural question. Are the trails conceptual? I'm not sure I'm reading the question correctly, but when does it move from conceptual to planned? What triggers it being a dotted line on a map to a solid line on a map? Can you talk through that process?
Well, once the land is acquired, we have a definite greenway corridor, and then oftentimes if it's an abandoned railroad corridor that's acquired, we have both the greenway and the trail bed already in place. We don't always have that luxury, and sometimes land is acquired just to connect pieces of trail. The old railroad corridor may have been lost to road development or to land development. In that case, the actual alignment has to be determined. On the coast-to-coast connector, both of those are actually happening right now. On the far east side of the coast-to-coast connector is the Space Coast Gap, and there are two major sections out there, one through the Canaveral Seashore and the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge, where they're still studying where to put the trail, both to enhance its scenic nature and as well as to minimize its environmental impacts. But once you get to Titusville, the trail is going to be built on a railroad right-of-way, and that corridor is very clearly defined and delineated for the next, I think, 20-some-odd miles. So it really depends on the nature of how the gap is closed, whether there's an existing alignment or whether a new one has to be derived.
But we have trails on our priority trails map that are not purchased yet as far as right-of-way, so it's still a line on a map. It just doesn't have a real specific alignment because it may shift one way or the other depending on when they purchase the right-of-way.
Let me just add to that, or what the local government wants in the South Lake County, Sumter County gap on the coast to coast. There's two alignments that are right now being studied by the Department of Transportation. One, a more southern route that would go through existing conservation lands in the Withlacoochee State Forest. That would be a very rural trail. The other one going north of State Road 50, connecting two communities, Webster and Center Hill, that would be a much more of a developed trail through developed property, agricultural lands. So even in a case like this, where we've got a very specific gap, there are many ways to solve the problem, and it depends largely on what the local government sponsors and the community want to see.
Okay, thank you. We have a comment and a question on the whole issue of private property owners and trails. The comment is that county property appraisers can be helpful to landowners in determining the influence of donating conservation easements on real estate taxes, and they encourage you to work closely with financial tax advisors and make sure that the appraisal contains all of the required information. The question regards liability protection. Is that a reference to the sovereign immunity statute, and does that mean that the state would indemnify the property owner if they are sued directly for injuries caused on the trail?
Right. The state would cover the property owner. It's through Chapter 260, I believe, are enacting legislation about giving the liability protection to property owners on a state-approved designated trail. So these are trails designation proposals that are approved by our council. It's the Florida Greenways and Trails Council. That council is appointed by different entities such as the governor and the Speaker of the House, President of the Senate, and that is in statute, that council. So that is, they can vote on things, and those votes are binding. So it's not just an advisory council. And so if a proposal is approved by them, they can receive the liability protection.
Okay. We have a question about public transportation. Is there any planning for public transportation to access these trails in more urban environments in Florida, such as South Florida?
Yeah, that's another great question. Thank you very much for that. One of the wonderful side benefits of these webinars and these regionally connected trail proposals, it's really kind of galvanized a lot of local governments into rethinking their bicycle and pedestrian system. We're seeing a number of counties, and especially in the urban areas, that are now rethinking how to connect to this, both through public transportation and through their existing on-road network. One of the issues that came up at the summit on October 1st in Winter Garden on the Coast to Coast is the awareness that if we're going to be inviting tourists and out-of-state visitors to use these trails, when they come off the trails looking for local services like restaurants or hotels, they need to make sure they're coming off onto a system that's bicycle friendly. And one of the ideas that's been bubbling around now for a while has been working with the League of American Cyclists to see if we could not only have local communities along the corridors designated as bicycle-friendly communities, but the entire regional corridor could become a potentially bicycle-friendly corridor. And that would mean that local governments have to realign a lot of their transportation systems to take advantage of that, and we're already seeing it beginning to happen. So thanks for that question. I meant to mention it and just forgot.
Yeah, that's a great question, and some of these trails are now trying to have spurs to airports and to bus stations. Many city buses now allow bicycles to come on board. They put it in the front of the bus. And some of the train systems now, people can take a train, and there was a highly publicized ride on the St. Johns River Sea Loop. They took a train from Orlando to, I forgot the town, and just to show that they can do that without having to drive to the trail.
They took Sunrail from Orlando to DeLand and then rode their bikes.
Exactly. So you'll be seeing more of that, I think, as these train systems are developed.
Okay. On another track, what is the estimated cost to maintain a multi-use trail? Do either of you have figures on that?
It varies quite a bit depending on the trail, obviously. The St. Mark's Trail is different than the Keys Trail, for example. The St. Mark's Trail, it's probably comes close to $10,000 a mile, but you can't use that as something for every trail. The Cross Florida Greenway is such a wide body of land, they have to do more land management for that, so it costs more money for that because it may be a mile or two wide in many places. So it's hard to throw out a figure that suddenly that's used all over the state. It's not true, but just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think the other component that people need to be thinking about is Amendment 1 monies. Also, were envisioned to help the state and local governments better manage their existing public resources and public lands. This interconnected trail system is going to have such a tremendous economic benefit to communities everywhere that we need to make sure these trails are well maintained and very safe. And so I think a potential interim source of funding to help local governments deal with that management question may be Amendment 1.
Right. And I guess we're just talking mostly in the shared use trails. Obviously, it's much less expensive to maintain the non-paved trails, hiking trails, and the paddling trails. So it's mostly the access points, and a lot of volunteers are used for those trails. Vital. They're vital to keep those trails open.
Okay. How many miles of the trail system exist now, and how many more are proposed?
Of the proposed 2,000-mile priority trail system that's currently on OGT's maps, about 600 miles are paved. So about a third of the system is already in place. In certain areas like the coast to coast, almost three-quarters of the trail was already in place, which is one of the reasons we selected it as the first of the regional trail connectors. Because it varies widely all over the state of Florida. But again, the $1.5 billion estimate was designed to build the remaining two-thirds of the entire system and connect it all together.
Okay. It was mentioned that the trail system is compatible with residential development and private property owners want a direct connection. Have you seen an acceleration of residential development along the existing system?
That's a very interesting question. Let me give you an anecdote by way of saying yes. Both on the West Orange Trail, new developments along the trail advertise the trail as their main street. That's happening just outside of Winter Garden, where a very successful community development project out there, West Orange Trail goes right through it, and the homes closest to the trail sell the best. There are other instances where on the Sun Coast where the transportation planners had never anticipated that a residential development would occur as rapidly as it did on portions of the Sun Coast, because the common thinking was, who wants to build a residential complex next to a major expressway? Well, that turned out to be true on the east side of the Sun Coast, but on the west side they put the Sun Coast Trail. And residential development on the west side accelerated in response to that. It's become, even though the trail parallels the Sun Coast for almost 50 miles, it's a highly used trail along its length, and many of the communities along there use that trail as part of their overall access to the system. So the answer is yes, a lot of good examples of how residential development is compatible.
Okay. Getting back to the issue of the difference between opportunity trails and priority trails, are opportunity trails conceptual and priority trails planned? I think somebody's trying to get a distinction in their mind between it.
You can have an opportunity trail that's totally conceptual. It's on maybe a local government's long-range plan, and you can have one that's being built. All the trails in the whole network are on the opportunity trails. So we tease out the ones that we feel are connected to the system better as far as long-distance trails, and ones that may have a greater degree of readiness in some cases are on the priority trails network. So you can think of the opportunity trails as every trail, whether it's being paved or planned right now, to just an idea that's on a long-range plan somewhere.
But I think that the key thing is to make sure that if you're hoping to connect your local trail system, that you look at how to do that in relationship to these regional connectors. It's impossible for OGT to show that universe, because there are literally just tens of thousands of miles of trails being planned all over Florida that if they were put on the opportunity maps, it'd be impossible to even read through them at that level of detail.
Yeah, one question, kind of simplistic, that we would pose to local government is, if you received $5 million tomorrow, where would you put that money for your trail system? And that helps them prioritize their trails, and that's kind of what we use. It doesn't mean if a trail doesn't go on the priority system maps this time, it may not be ready. In 3 years, we'll be updating this process again, so it may be ready at that point.
And as these local governments begin to realize the significance of these regional connectors, they're, as I said earlier, rejiggering their systems to connect. I just got a message from the city of Lakeland the other day. They're rethinking their systems so that they could connect the city to the coast to coast via the Van Fleet Trail, but they're also now aware of the Southwest Coast Connector proposed, and so they're beginning to look westward how they can connect their city system across to both of these regional connectors. To really understand how that system is going to evolve, you need to work with your local transportation planners and local governments. They have the very best maps as to how all this thing is going to be built and how it'll look.
Okay, we have two more questions related to the issue of private landowners, and I'll ask them both because I think they're interrelated. What happens if a property owner does not want their land to be part of the trail? And then more of a comment, there are gaps that need to be filled going through private property in the community of Englewood. As a real estate lawyer and at times tax advisor, what resources are available to help convince folks that there are tax benefits and other benefits for landowners to gain more support?
Doug, you want me to take a shot at that first, and then
go ahead? I just wanted to mention too, our office does not use eminent domain. We deal completely with landowners that are willing to do this. So there's no eminent domain on our part for this. So it's all willing landowners. But sometimes that's why you see trails that are not straight across some place. There's lots of jigs and jogs because you may have a landowner that doesn't want the trail there, and so we have to go around it some way. So that's why these trails are not always direct.
Yeah, there's no requirement that adjacent landowners connect to these trails at all. And if they don't want that access, they don't have to provide it. That is something I've never come across yet. Almost invariably, the landowner's first question is, how can I access these trails, because it's a major amenity for his development. But again, there's no requirement. With regard to the technical question, I just have to go back. The law provides for these tax benefits depending on the nature of the rights conveyed and the value of the right conveyed. To really be able to get a good, solid, reliable answer to any individual question of an easement or access, you really need to look with your local property appraiser's office and local CPAs and knowledgeable financial advisors. It is a very complicated question sometimes, and very difficult to give anybody any assurances other than these benefits are potentially there if you go looking for them and have the right advice.
I guess this ties into the thing. Is there like one page somewhere that says you may be eligible for tax incentives, you have immunity, these are other types of benefits? Is something like that available to help people, convince private property owners in their community that they want to participate in this? Or is that something that could be done?
Obviously, that seems to be a need. It keeps coming up in this webinar, so we might need to do that, besides just what we have in our designation process.
Yeah, I think it's coming in part from a perspective of people who want to, facilitate the trails in their communities, and they need more tools to convince private property owners of the benefits. And, certainly
some of these incentives are local, so it's hard to put on the local incentives on one state website, but there may be some other state incentives. And sometimes Florida Forever does buy easements. They don't buy the property, and so in that case, a landowner or a rancher, for example, can keep the property, but there may be an easement or conservation easement that's purchased by the state. And as part of that, it could be public access could be part of that. It's not always part of that, but it could be.
Okay. We have a good land use question. Is it possible that the trail system could become too popular if it galvanizes residential development along it? And I'm assuming they mean in inappropriate areas. How will natural vistas and other ecological value be protected?
One of the beautiful things about these long-distance corridors is they spread people out. Even on the highly used Pinellas Trail, that's getting well over 100,000 users a month, when you're on the trail, except when you're coming into the downtown areas, you rarely ever feel like you're being crowded or the trail is being overused. I can imagine a day where it could become very crowded because of its popularity. But like most everything else, I would imagine that would be on weekends and high-use periods. And I think the simple response to this is that the public and the local governments will provide more trails and spread people out. even more. The key to all this is to not only get the big regional connectors in place so people can move from one location to another, but then to also connect those regional trails to lots of parks, other communities, and high destination areas that people are going to want to go to. If there's plenty of places for people to go, they'll leave the connectors to go to those places, and they won't just be required to stay on those big regional connectors. But I think that's a problem I'm looking forward to having.
And we're trying to offer more and more trails all the time so we can spread the use out. Locally and near Tallahassee, we have the Wakulla River, which can be extremely popular on weekends, but there's many other choices. And the more trails that are developing on our websites, the more this use can be spread out. So not everybody thinks of just one trail to go to.
One of the most interesting combinations that I've seen recently, Doug, and you may have seen this, is I saw a bicyclist pulling a kayak, and he was paddling down to the river so he could go paddling. And I'm thinking, wow,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
there's someone who's talking about multi-use in one system. So he was taking maximum enjoyment about this whole system that we're creating.
I think it's always fun watching some of the Winnebagos, the RVs go down. They have kayaks on top. They got bikes on the front. They got every form of recreation with them. And I always think, who said you can't take it with you?
Absolutely.
They do.
Okay, I'm going back and seeing if I missed any questions, and we do have one specific one from your presentation, Dale, and then I'm going to wrap up with a couple of broader questions that have come in. What is the timeline on the Good Neighbor Trail? Is the State Road 50 bypass around the south side of Brooksville a part of the Coast to Coast Trail?
I can't give any up-to-date on that particular gap. I know that that's an issue of concern down there, that a lot of people are working on it. I don't have any details that I can share with you at that point.
Okay. Let me see. The question about development along the trails had more to do with the popularity of property ownership along the trail, such that it would incite inappropriate development in the wrong places. So what and this gets into land use and zoning issues, of course, in terms of.
I think Vivian, I think the bigger concern that people should be alert here is that they're concerned about protecting these greenway and trail corridors. Is remember that many of them were old railroad rights of way, and as such they were zoned industrial. And a lot of the land uses along these industrial corridors were zoned for commercial and industrial purposes. Those zonings probably still exist in many, many areas. And it's very conceivable that we could get a land use that would be completely incompatible next to one of these trails because of one of these old land uses. I think if you're really concerned, you need to work with your local government officials to look at those land use and zoning maps in light of this new reality that these are becoming recreational trails. They're becoming high-purpose quality of life trails. They're becoming future, I think, wildlife and conservation corridors. And we should be looking at a future where more parks and more redevelopment of residential would take place along here and far less commercial and high-intensity industrial use.
Okay, great. And we have one last suggestion, I guess, and Dale, you and I had talked about this a while ago when we were planning things. They suggested a webinar on tax and liability issues from a legal accounting perspective. We talked more generally about kind of the economic benefits of trails, but I think certainly a webinar on more of the specifics of why a community should want a trail, why a property owner should want a trail might be something that is needed given the tone of this conversation. Is that something we could work on for next year, perhaps?
I think that's the very next best thing we can do, Vivian. I'd be delighted to work with you guys on it.
Good idea.
Okay. Do either of you have any closing comments you'd like to make?
Yeah, there was a question earlier to Dale, I believe, about some of the economic benefits of, I think, maybe greenways or conservation lands, or they alluded to it. And Tall Timbers Research Station just north of Tallahassee has done some studies about the economic benefits of wildlands, of conservation lands. Since they work with private landowners quite a bit, and they have a network of the Red Hills Conservation Area with hundreds of thousands of acres in this system. So look on their website, just type in Google Tall Timbers Research Station and look up their economic studies on the value open space and conservation lands. That might be relevant to conservation lands throughout the state. And I gave their study to some of our state land managers as well.
Okay. And that is called the Ecosystem Services Study. So if you Google an ecosystem services, it should pull it up. I just wanted to thank both of our presenters for their wonderful job today. It's always so informative and exciting to find out about what's being planned. The participants today, if you have any comments or suggestions, you'll be getting an email about an hour after this webinar, and it does have a brief questionnaire in it through SurveyMonkey. If you would send your comments in to us, we do follow your comments and try to make adjustments, so we really appreciate your feedback. In particular, if you have questions that you'd like addressed regarding Greenways in an upcoming webinar, let us know about that. And also, as I said, we are looking for ways to keep charging $10 per person for webinar, and including people who are getting professional certification credit. So if you're watching this in a group setting right now, if you have suggestions on how we can more equitably spread the cost out of the webinars, we'd appreciate that as well. At that, I'd like to thank our speakers and say goodbye, and hope you'll sign up for our January webinar on legal issues associated with sea level rise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Two questions. You did.